There's something to be said about an expedition in the 21st century, because expedition now doesn't mean the same thing it meant 100 years ago. When you think of an expedition, you probably think of something like a journey to find the North Pole, a group of 7 brave pioneers trenching through hostile environments with diminishing supplies, struggling to navigate with faulty equipment and a lack of food. Or maybe you think of an expedition by sea, a treacherous endeavour to discover new lands, navigating by compass to sail around the globe. But all that's been done already. Technology enables us to travel nearly anywhere on Earth we desire, and most of the planet's been discovered at this point. So, in the 21st century, if you want to go on an expedition, you can't follow in the footsteps of those before you. There's a different kind of path you have to take. One that doesn't involve inhospitable conditions or voyaging into the unknown. Instead, it involves 2 seats, an underpowered lawnmower engine, and a distinct lack of any concrete plan. This is Jack. He's a landscaper from Oxford, and I've known him since we were in school. He's the kind of guy that says yes to things before you've even finished asking the question. As a result, he's been with me on most of the ridiculous adventures I've been on in the past, such as flying to Iceland in the middle of winter with just a tent. He also joined me last year when we got a Fiat Panda stuck on a beach, and then stuck on a mountain. This car is the starting point of our 21st century expedition. We bought it 2 years ago, cash in hand, for 300 quid. I'm pretty sure it's never been serviced in its life before it came into our possession. Last year we gave it everything it needed, chucked a tent and some spare underwear in the boot, and set off on a 4-day journey up the spine of the UK. It made it to Scotland and back without so much as a hiccup. In the subsequent 12 months, we started prepping the car for a longer journey. We gave it a roof rack made from an old bed frame, welded up a snorkel to help us with extreme dust or river crossings. The gearbox was renewed after it spewed oil all over our new clutch. We reinforced the radiator bracket and replaced the smashed rear window with 2 spare wheels. In early July 2022, we set off. Our target? The country of Georgia, one of the many little-known beauties of the Eurasian landmass. But those who have been tend to agree on its incredible culture and wonderful people. This round trip totals over 12,000 kilometres. The journey started abruptly with a send-off in London, before we hopped on the ferry to continental Europe. The first few days were spent acclimating ourselves to a life of living out of a 4-door family hatchback. Hot weather, lunch on the roof. I slept in a hammock for the first time in my life. I've been camping ever since I was little. Back then I went because my parents said we were going. That's pretty much what you do as a child, but for some reason it stuck with me. I loved it then, and I love it now. As I've grown older and become more autonomous, I've been slowly pushing the boundaries as to what I call camping. I'm not sure if it's out of frugality, not wanting to pay to sleep in a field, or if there's some deeper reasoning about the desire to be free from societal norms and expectations, it's probably just because I'm a cheapskate. Camping in a ditch on the side of the road tends to be free. So that's what we did. The benefit of having such a ridiculous roof rack is that we only need to park next to a single post to set up our sleeping arrangements. As we pushed the limits of what we thought was a socially acceptable camping spot, we were met with nothing but interest and appreciation for what we were doing. A family discovers we're basically hammocking in their front garden, and they come out and offer us bottles of water. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At this point, we've driven through 5 countries in as many days, been stuck in a traffic jam on the German Autobahn for 3 hours, camped 20 metres from a live racetrack, and we've just reached the start line. Start line? You may be wondering what I'm talking about. The truth is, Jack and I aren't doing this expedition alone. We're joined by over 100 other teams from all around the globe as part of a little thing called the Mongol Rally.
The Mongol Rally is a silly little race where the primary goal is not how fast you do it, but how dumb you do it. The shittiness of your car, the nonsensical nature of your chosen route, and the general debauchery you get yourself into is your goal. For some, spending the summer in a hot, broken car in the middle of bumfuck nowhere sounds fun. And that is exactly what the Mongol Rally is for.
What the start line really showed us was that there were hundreds of other like-minded people with similar, slightly mental ambitions to set sail on a seemingly unattainable voyage, lining up to partake in what is likely the biggest adventure of most of our lives. None of us knowing what was to come, but everyone equally excited to find out. One certainty, however, is that our experiences would all be vastly different. Some teams had opted for an arguably more sensible direct route through Eastern Europe, Turkey, then straight to Georgia. Others decided going via Scotland, Scandinavia, or Africa was more suitable. Although the traditional rally finish line is in Mongolia, it's effectively impossible to complete without travel through Russia at some point, which was no longer an option for the vast majority of rallyists. Resultantly, the finish line was moved to Georgia, and the official rally charity was the DEC Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, who helped deliver vital aid to hundreds of thousands of people affected by the war in and around Ukraine. The first few days and nights of the journey were relatively hiccup-free. We drove down into Austria, camped in a forest at the end of a private road, and spent some time exploring Vienna and the surrounding area. Late one night, we were trying to find a camping spot in the darkness. We crested a hill and are greeted by a vast array of red flashing lights towering high into the sky. For several minutes, we're just sat in awe with limited ideas as to what these looming red dots could be, but taken aback by the spectacle regardless. We later discovered that this area hosted Austria's largest concentration of wind turbines, and we'd stumbled across a wind farm with over 300 turbines, each with a synchronized red flashing beacon. We set up camp a few minutes down a farm track on the side of a field and fell asleep fully encompassed in the light show above us. This is what we woke up to the following morning. Leaving the wind farm, we started experiencing our first taste of difficulty. We had overheated previously on the motorway, but a few days later we started to uncover the extent of our problems. We limped the Panda over the border to Hungary, needing to stop every 15 minutes to fill up the fast-draining coolant system. After asking around several car part shops and mechanics' workshops with little success, we ended up following a Hungarian man back to his family house, where we parked in the driveway, and these two mechanics who spoke zero English got to work diagnosing the problem. After changing the water pump without solving the leak, we discovered a core plug had at some point become as effective as a sieve at holding in coolant. Core plugs are designed to plug up holes in the coolant channels of an engine block, which exist as a byproduct of the manufacturing process. In other words, they keep the coolant, which is needed to stop your engine overheating and destroying itself on the side of a road, inside the engine and not all over the floor. After 6 hours of work, taking the engine apart 3 times, replacing the core plug twice, and help from the mechanic's assistants, we were finally back on the road. Unbeknownst to us, this would be far from the last time the coolant issue came to haunt us.
Summertime, love's in its prime. Summertime, everything's just fine.
Budapest is one of our favourite European cities. We've both been there several times before, but we couldn't pass up the opportunity to visit again. I've been trying to understand what it is that causes us to feel a connection to a city. Of course, Budapest is lovely, and you should visit if you can, but so are so many other cities I've been to, like Edinburgh or Barcelona or Prague. Yet they don't quite share the same indescribable feeling, this affliction towards them, quite like Budapest.
Winter town, blood in the snow. Winter town, relieves the need to know.
Way back when we'd just finished sixth form, Jack, myself, and our friend Harry went out travelling on our own for the first time, each with a rucksack and an Interrail ticket. It wasn't an expedition. Yeah, we were students with no money, so we stayed in some sketchy hostels and ate the cheapest food we could find, but there was always a bed at the end of the day, and our plan was pretty solid from the get-go. But it was special. We finished that journey in Budapest, flying back to England after 17 days and resuming preparations to start university. I think the reason that it stuck with me so much is that adventure was the first real taste of starting my own personal journey into becoming an adult. The freedom that came after 14 years of formal education and being sent off into the world to finally do your own thing. I guess that's why it keeps drawing me back. The city is effectively the physical embodiment of the start of the road for me when it comes to adventuring. And 6 years later, that desire to be out in the world, meet new people, and discover new things has only grown stronger. Several days later, after some long drives and our first taste of border issues, we arrived in Romania, one of Europe's lesser-known gems. Some of the most beautiful landscapes I've ever seen at our fingertips, we began to push the boundaries of what a small city car is capable of, but it excelled at every opportunity. The next day was spent once again marvelling at the natural beauty of Romania. The evening brought further testing of our panda's rally abilities in an attempt to find the lost village of Jumana. What was once a happy and thriving village became something very different in 1978. Nicolae Ceausescu, the communist dictator of Romania at the time, ordered the development of a nearby underground copper deposit, turning it into the largest copper mine in Europe at the time. Byproducts of the ore processing included a huge quantity of toxic slurry, which were to be decanted into the nearby basin, which happened to include the village at the bottom of the valley. Over 1,000 people were forced to leave. As processing began, houses, schools, gardens were all engulfed by the toxic waste, eventually leaving nothing visible except for the spire of the village church.
Might have to reverse back up. Stop there. Oh, stop.
Despite Jack's best efforts to add us to the list of submerged objects, did I mention that our handbrake doesn't work at all?
Ready? Yep. Oh, good.
We eventually made it back up the hill and out of the valley. We explored a local abandoned railway station, bathed in one of many rivers, had one of the few rain showers of the whole trip, which eventually left us without a radio aerial after our waterproof tarp ripped and snapped it while driving.
Jesus.
Before finding a camp spot for the night just down the road from our next destination, the Trans-Fagarasan Highway. What is frequently described as one of the greatest driving roads in the world, the Trans-Fagarasan Highway is over 150 kilometers of unbroken tarmac, carving its way through the Fagaras Mountains, reaching an altitude of over 2,000 meters. Construction was completed in the 70s, after it took over 6,500 tons of dynamite and claimed 40 lives. Nicolae Ceausescu at the time argued the road was of military importance in the event of a Russian invasion. But today, the highway is one of Romania's most popular tourist destinations. It's easy to see why. As we began on the journey climbing up through the trees, Jack and I both started feeling a tingling anticipation of what was to come. Despite pushing our 59 horsepower engine as much as it would allow, and still barely keeping up with the local trade vans, we were ecstatic. The road was perfect, the weather was beautiful. As we climbed out of the tree line, the view only got more breathtaking. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. The engine had overheated after sending it full throttle to the top of the mountain. Then back down for action drone shots, then back up so Jack could have a go. And in doing so, the core plug that we'd repaired just days prior had popped out. As in, gone completely. There was no coolant left in the engine. And to say that our water supplies were dwindling would be generous. It also didn't help that this was one of the hottest days of the journey so far. We were on the ridge of the Fagaras mountain range with no means of cooling a tow truck, an engine without coolant that we couldn't start for risk of seizing, and about 2 litres of water between us. We quickly realised we had ourselves in a dire situation. The nearest town was 30 kilometres back the way we'd come, and there was no guarantee we would find parts or a workshop there. But it was our best option for one reason. It was all downhill. Jumping back into the car, we started to coast it back down the mountain pass road. No engine, No power steering, no power brakes. We had the hazards on to indicate our situation was less than ideal, but soon realised it was close to depleting our already tired battery, so we switched to toggling them on and off whenever a local caught up behind us. We caught some decent speed on the steep sections of the hill, and eventually we made it back down to the bottom. That, however, meant pushing the last few kilometres until we reached the main road where we originally turned off. After a few hours at the junction and attempting to get help from breakdown drivers, a global expedition vehicle from Switzerland, and even a couple of other rally teams, we eventually found a van driver who knew a guy with a trailer who could get us to a mechanic. We were dropped off outside with the promise that the mechanic would turn up that evening to check out the car. The next few hours we spent taking apart the car, getting to the hole in the block where the core plug wasn't, and cleaning up all the old sealant in an attempt to save us time and money when the mechanic eventually arrived. Well, the mechanic didn't arrive that evening, and we spent one of the worst nights of the trip camping on the side of the main road we were now stranded at. To top it all off, I now had severe nausea from drinking river water a couple of days prior, and I didn't eat much for the next few days while I recovered. The following morning, the mechanic arrived. We explained the problem, and he got to work sourcing the parts and repairing the engine. By lunchtime, we had a new core plug installed and fresh coolant in the radiator. However, upon starting the car, we discovered a new and exciting issue with our Panda. The car started and idled at 3,000 RPM, about 5 times what it should do on a healthy engine, and the throttle was either 0% or 100%, on or off, redline or nothing, regardless of how lightly you touched the accelerator pedal. I won't bore you with the details, but over the next 5 hours we attempted, unsuccessfully, to diagnose this new issue. We eventually decided that the car at least ran, and we couldn't spend another night there.
We've just escaped the beautifully nice and cool workshop of Ika and Alex. They've just put the freezer cap back in and replaced the crappy timer belt. They got about half an hour. And then now it's like nearly 5 o'clock and we are driving out of there. Thank you.
I just want to take a moment to thank some of the amazing businesses that helped us on this journey, without some of whom we wouldn't have made it past the end of our driveway. Unmanned provided the drone, therefore enabling us to capture some of the best shots of the entire film and allow us to storytell in a way which wouldn't otherwise be possible. Hadley Services went above and beyond in providing mechanical assistance to the Panda before we left, including helping with the roof rack and repairing the clutch and gearbox. Forby gave us a whole host of off-roading, camping and general survival gear, which we used extensively throughout the journey. Everything from the light bar on the bonnet to our bivy loo was greatly appreciated. Ace Gearboxes refurbished our gearbox free of charge after it was found to be on its last legs a couple of weeks before we were set to depart. And Motor Parts Direct helped us out with replacement parts, including a new clutch, after our original one tore itself to bits a month before the rally. Thank you all again for supporting our adventure. Now back to the film. Blasting through Bulgaria, we tried several auto parts stores, including a Fiat dealership, in an attempt to find a replacement camshaft sensor, a part we believed to be causing our issues. On the 7th or 8th attempt, we had success, but quickly discovered after replacing the part that the problem was not so easily resolved. Nevertheless, we powered on, and after showing all our documents and getting scammed for a vignette, we crossed the border into Turkey. This is where the adventure really began for me. I've done a fair bit of travelling around Europe, and although each country has its own rich culture, great variety of food, and spectacular sights, there's always a consistency with European countries. Almost everyone will speak English to some degree. Everyone follows mostly the same road rules, whether written or unwritten. You always find at least some foods you'll recognise in a nearby Lidl or Carrefour. If you're familiar with one city in Europe, you'll manage basically fine in any other. At the Turkish border, this all changed. As we hit the outskirts of Istanbul, the contrast with what we were used to was unequivocal. The 6-lane highway became a 12-lane behemoth, with side roads splitting off and joining back constantly. Between the traffic lanes were caged in bus lanes where public transport would zoom through all the traffic. Neon lights glared off our dusty windscreen, adding to the barrage of flashing colours from emergency vehicles and roadworks. Around midnight, we understood that we needed to pull off the main road, as we'd been driving for 40 minutes with nothing but urban sprawl surrounding us. It took another half an hour of searching for a suitable camp location. Eventually, we turned off the engine after 15 hours on the road. I think we've just found our camp spot for the night. Nestled in the middle of Istanbul. We're parked up on the side of the road. There's a couple of trees we can swing a hammock from. There's a barky dog over there. Istanbul is the craziest city I've ever driven through. It's just constant. It's huge and sprawling. The driving is insane and unreal. You just go and everyone moves around you. I'm lost for words, but it's definitely going to take the cake for the craziest wild camp spot, I think, that we've done. Following day taking in as much of Istanbul as we possibly could. It's one of the most memorable cities I've ever been to. They say Istanbul is the gateway to Asia, and it really was so much more than I could have imagined going in. As we were crossing the bridge over the Bosphorus Strait, the official line between Europe and Asia, we experienced one of several defining moments of the trip, showcasing the compassion of the Turkish people. We were blasting music out of our rooftop speakers, which clearly one of the locals enjoyed. They shouted us down from their car and handed us a package through the window.
These guys up here have just handed us some freshly baked something, I don't know, but they look delicious.
Whoa!
Dinner!
From what might be one of my personal favourite moments on the trip, quickly turned into the defining worst night I think I've had. I don't even have footage because I was so stressed I forgot to record anything. It was super late by the time we made out of the urban sprawl of Istanbul. Not only were we yet again struggling to find a camp spot, we were also in dire need of a mechanic. Remember the core plug that was last fixed in Romania? Well, it was leaking again, as we had discovered the previous day. It was about 2 AM. Neither of us had mobile internet in Turkey to use maps. The car was overheating every 20 minutes. We accidentally followed what we assumed was a drug dealer down a muddy trail where we almost got stuck. There's something about Turkey which means there are barely any suitable hammock locations. Everywhere had houses and barking dogs. There was nowhere private. Then we climbed a hill just outside a small town where we found a single tree that we could both tie off. I set my hammock up and immediately realised all the bushes around us were sticky. That one tree we found was dripping sap off its leaves all over the surrounding area, and I really didn't want to have to spend the rest of the trip with a sticky hammock. At this point, it was well into the early hours of the morning. We were both exhausted. The Panda was struggling to carry on. It was leaking coolant to no end, and we didn't have the water supplies to keep going. Eventually, we found a reasonable space to park up, crawled into the passenger seat of the Panda, and managed to catch some sleep. The following morning, after asking some locals, we managed to stumble across a workshop. All too familiar with the workshop in Romania, the mechanics weren't actually there yet, so as we were experts at this point, we jacked the car up, threw off the wheel, engine mount, timing cover, and exposed the core plug once more. When the mechanics did turn up, two Turkish brothers that spoke not a word of English, they reacted differently to any mechanic I've ever experienced. They saw what we were doing and immediately offered us their jacks and air tools to make it easier. They then took down socket sets and presented them, and eventually we had our own workbench with a plethora of tools at our disposal. We were given a constant supply of Turkish tea. Jack was given a lift to a parts store to buy yet another core plug. They bought us lunch, our first traditional Turkish meal, and then Jack went on a date with one of their friends to see the sights, share a beer, and go fruit picking. Yeah, I don't quite understand why either, but it was graciously received by Jack. At the end of the day, they offered their shower for us to both clean up. I didn't take it personally, and when we tried to pay them for all their services, they outright refused. Their compassion and overwhelming hospitality was a beautiful thing, and those mechanics are two people we'll likely never forget. And our combined repair efforts kept that core plug watertight for the rest of the journey. The hospitality we experienced continued throughout Turkey, whether it was from service station attendants taking photos with us and signing the car, or a taxi driver gifting us a handful of plums in a lay-by. We voyaged on towards our next stop, the D915, the Bayburt of Yolu, also known as the most dangerous road in the world.
The three of us had been on the road for over 4 weeks. While we were excited about the constant stream of new experiences and challenges, we were also feeling tired and decision fatigued. However, we were determined to push forward with our adventure. So when our Instagram followers voted for us to head to the D915, we set off early in the morning with anticipation. The D915 is a road unlike any other. It's a treacherous mountain road in northeast Turkey, known for its narrow and winding path, lack of railings or barriers, and vastly unpaved surface. As we left Bayburt and headed north towards the Black Sea, the first few kilometers were relatively easy, but soon the road narrowed and the surface became rough. As fog rolled in and visibility decreased, driving became even more difficult. As we rounded one last hairpin, waiting at the side of the road was another rally team, Team Pantrover.
As the night slowly enveloped us, our newly formed team powered on in an attempt to reach the start of the D915. Our car had no power to start with, and a damaged engine and all the extra weight from our roof rack and rally supplies meant we were barely making it up some of the mountain tracks. Eventually we had to call it. Even with 4 of us pushing, the Panda was burning rubber and clutch while making little progress. So we stopped on the side of the road and set up camp once more.
Sitting.
Of course, we couldn't catch a break at this point. One of the locals wasn't happy we were stopped on the nice side of the road. And we were forced to head all the way back to the main road to find a new spot. The next day, we tried a different route. It was relentless. The heat of the Turkish sun wasn't playing kindly with the barrage I was putting our car's engine through. I needed to keep the revs high enough to make it up the constant climb. Any time we stopped, it was an ordeal to hill start without a handbrake, and the climb seemed never-ending. And between 2 of us without aircon and 3 of us hiking the trail to keep the weight down, we were all struggling. With an ever-climbing temperature gauge and the recent memory of spending hours in garages repairing the coolant system, we eventually had to make a decision.
Decided we don't want to risk the coolant situation any further, so we're parked up on the side of the road. The plan is to walk the remaining 7k or whatever, 5k.
With the other team Skoda acting as a taxi to help us with the remaining hike, and after a reverse hill jump start, we finally made it to the top. Despite only meeting our new friends less than 24 hours prior, we already felt an incredible bond with them. After bumping into these otherwise complete strangers on a mountain pass, we shared a small part of our journeys in an attempt to get us and our silly little hatchbacks to the top of a mountain. Although we parted ways less than a day later, we now felt like we'd known them for years. All of a sudden, there it was. The goal we had originally set was now staring us in the face. The country of Georgia was only a short border crossing away. If the lasting memory of Turkey was hospitality and kind-natured people, in contrast, a standout memory of Georgia was the driving experience. From potholes in major cities that you could lose your dog in, to huge foreign construction projects that seared through the landscape, the driving standards were somehow a step below Turkey, but at this point, we embraced it. Diving between lanes, squeezing into any available space, undertaking queues of traffic. Despite the complete chaos to an outsider, everyone ran by the same unwritten rules, and somehow it all just worked. After 26 days, 171 hours at the wheel between us, and over 6,000 kilometers under the tires, we made it to the finish line. We were only 2 days within the rally time limit, but we made it. As more ralliers arrived, we all shared in the triumph of completing such an unbelievable adventure. We'd all set out on completely different paths with the same end goal, to undertake a 21st century expedition. We celebrated for a week, and finally it was time to turn around and head back home. Look, if you're still with me, I'm going to give you the highlight for the remainder of the journey, getting from Georgia back to the UK. We had an altercation with the Georgian police, but we somehow managed to turn it into an opportunity for them to sign our car before they presented us with gifts for their trouble. I drove the longest I ever have in one go, 18 hours straight with a 2-hour stop in the middle to get back through all of Turkey in one go. We saved an Italian lady who'd got her van stuck on the beach in Greece. Albania had some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen after the main road we were following became a loose surface mountain pass. We got stuck in a 2-hour standstill traffic jam at the border between Montenegro and Croatia, which was all uphill, and we did not have a handbrake. Italy gave us this vast, dried up riverbed where I captured my favourite drone shot of the whole trip, which was later followed by a tropical rainstorm at 4 AM, leaving us stranded in the foothills of the Alps. There was so much more to this journey that I could possibly fit into this film. Although I've tried my best, it's impossible to truly capture the feelings, the emotions, the highs, the lows, euphoria, falling outs, making ups, the love for new friends, the sensation of lying on a bed after weeks of sleeping outside, the incredible food, the wildly different cultures, the struggle of trying to communicate without a common language, and the raw energy you feel when you're able to regardless. If this film hasn't already, I can only say this. If it's at all possible for you, please get out there and live your own 21st century expedition. I promise you won't regret it.